would be good. I'm not a practicing architect. I'm a writer, a curator, and I'm dean of a college of design. We have architecture, but we also have interior design, historic preservation, and hopefully some new design programs. But some of the things I want to talk about will have to do with education. Some will have to do with the changing nature of architectural practice, especially in the US. I think it's probably very different in the US than in here. I think you haven't had so many job layoffs as we have. I want to talk a little bit about that. I also mostly want to talk. My name is Michael Speaks, so I do talk a lot. My middle name is Angelo, so that's Michael Angelo Speaks. That puts a lot more pressure on me. But I will tell you that as well as I speak, I write even more beautifully. And because I write so well and so beautifully, I would hate to deprive you of reading just a little bit of something. It's in the middle. It won't be tiresome, I hope, but it'll help clarify some of the things I want to talk about. So if you indulge me, I would like to read just a little bit in the middle. Okay, so what I really want to try and talk about is a new, what I view as a new intellectual paradigm in architectural practice, but especially in architectural education. And a lot of what I want to say will have implications, I hope, on schools. So I'll move on quickly here. This is the cover of the most recent architecture magazine. You may have seen it, you may have read it, maybe not. It's one of the two big trade journals in the US, Architecture Magazine and Architectural Record. Architectural Record used to be the journal, the official journal of the AIA, the American Institute of Architects. This magazine, Architecture, has now become so. It's an interesting cover. It was done with Bruce Mao, his design office, the cover and also a special feature inside. I put it up there because, in a way, this is what I want to try to wonder about in the talk. This is the cover of Architecture, but Architectural Record has a very similar and disturbing set of questions on its cover, and I'll show that shortly. So Mika said, well, so let's just say what's next really has to do with what just happened. People are, in the States in particular, are worried about what happens next. Some people have a very positive outlook of what that would be. Of course, this man is probably always happy no matter what happens. But like Rahm Emanuel in the U.S., he thinks a good crisis should never obviously be wasted. There's obviously a more serious aspect, especially in the U.S., to the problem. This was published in the New York Times in 2008, in the fall of 2008, and it's a real picture of a real person. It's an architect on the streets of New York who was sort of joking, but sort of not, selling his services for 5 cents. That's not very funny. That's a very different picture than this one. So let's just say the responses since 2008, 2009, I think in the States have been dramatically different, and there have been a range of them. The downturn in the US was felt almost as China was hosting the Olympics. So not only did we in the States have to start laying people off, we had to look at all these beautiful buildings being built in China. It was sort of like a double whammy. Well, and in Dubai, but then maybe they don't make so many of those anymore. There's still cranes, but not as many. So it's this that everybody has been reacting to, the what's next, because, well, what's next, why? Because of this. There are two kind of extremes of response in the U.S., I think, to the downturn. They are both, I want to say, ideological responses, and I will get to what I mean by that in just a little bit. One is a very moralistic response that shows a kind of, well, almost, well, let's just say it's not very positive about design. And it's driven by a kind of moral indignation. Design should be understood now as activism, And yes, that is a real word. There is a kind of style that's associated with this now called sustainism. It looks like a misprint, but in fact it's not. I'll show you a little bit more about that. One of the most extreme versions of this sort of moralistic response, I think, has come with the work of Architecture for Humanity. You may know this group. They're in San Francisco. They do a lot of terrific work, but their response really has been driven by a kind of a hatred for the Starchitecture system and high design in general. They published a number of books, including this one, which sums it up, Design Like You Give a Damn. A lot of it is driven, again, by this argument that design should be a practice of social activism. Here's another kind of version of that, which is a prize given by Courage Stone Foundation. It's a prize like a number of, there are a number of these prizes now, and they're mostly about social entrepreneurialism. Sometimes they have very little to do with design proper. This debate in the States became really quite heated. Architecture for Humanity were especially disturbed by this piece written by Nikolai Rusov. And why wouldn't you be? If you know him, he's our worthless critic at the New York Times. He made a career, well, worthless in my estimation. You may like him, but I'm not a big fan. He made a career writing on a series of star architects that he then decided, once the downturn came, were not so exciting anymore. And in this piece, well, the title, it was fun until the money ran out. It's a criticism of the whole Starchitecture system. This is the most kind of recent version, it seems to me, or that I've come across, of this sort of moralistic response to the downturn. Sustainism is the new modernism, so its authors claim. It's an incredibly ridiculous book, I think. It has about 200, 300 pages of aphorisms, each designed in with colorful fonts and pictures, and it's sort of like the worst of those. If you do Twitter, it's the worst of the kind of Twitter booster tweets that you get, that always say things about innovation and it's just too much good stuff going on in there, too much positive, in my opinion. Yeah, but that's good. Okay. So anyway, this is one extreme. This kind of moralistic extreme. There's another extreme, and it's also an ideology, I think. Parametricism, not parametric thought, but parametricism, formalism and technique. I was, as Winka said, I was at SciArc, the Southern California Institute of Architecture, for about 10 years before I came to Kentucky. And while there, I hired a lot of the people who now, I think, constitute a really interesting but odd agenda. And I want to talk a little bit about that. I was back at SciArc in the fall for the first time in a number of years for thesis reviews. And during that week, there were 3 or 4 events. One was a lecture, one was a panel discussion, and there were thesis reviews. This is a panel discussion. I don't know if you recognize any of these people, but they are the kind of the holy holies in LA of let's say parametricism and this kind of formalist approach. They are Peter Cook, you can see on that end, Eric Owen Moss, the director of the school, Tom Main, Greg Lynn in the middle, Frank Gehry hiding behind a microphone, Hernandez Alonso, head of the Argentinian mafia at SciArc, and Yael was the moderator that night. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the Beatles, but if you do, there was a very famous album called Abbey Road, and if you remember that album, there were 4 Beatles walking across Abbey Road. I guess it was Abbey Road, across the street on the cover, and 3 of them were dressed in black and one was dressed in white. And I worry about Greg Lynn when I look at this photograph. I hope nothing befalls him, but who knows. This is SciArc's, every year SciArc for their graduate thesis builds a kind of Thunderdome, and they did this year. They do the graduation inside there, and they have a famous speaker come and talk. This year at SciArc it was Peter Cook, Sir Peter Cook, I guess he is. And it was kind of, it was a bit disturbing, his talk, because what he said was SciArc is one of the few schools left in the world where we have older children teaching younger children, and the only difference between them is that the older children, the faculty, just move around bigger colored blocks. The children, the students move around small, just shift around small colored blocks. The faculty just move around big ones. And you know, it was hard to kind of hear this, knowing that the students at the school pay about, you know, $50,000 US a year in tuition. So you sit there with those parents, and you wonder, my God, I'm paying $200,000 for people to move around colored blocks and to show my children how to move around colored blocks. Anyway, it was, they do more than that there, and that's part of what I want to talk about. Well, later that week, Patrick Schumacher, the eminent Patrick Schumacher of Zaha Hadid Architects, was also giving a lecture. So 3 big events that week. Patrick was talking about parametricism and the autopoiesis of architecture. Very beautiful title in a book that's forthcoming. Peter Cook, as only Peter Cook could do and could get away with, looked out during the speech and said, you know, I can only imagine when Patrick lectures two evenings from now, because this was on a Sunday, that with all the lights and with all the sparkling things in the air, and given Patrick's new fervent belief that he has discovered the truth of architecture and the new style for the world, that we will have seen nothing like this since Nuremberg. Only Peter Cook can get away with saying something like that. We'll see. So Patrick gave his lecture. You may know Patrick is, as I said, this book just came out, or it's coming out. And if you haven't been subjected to the numerous manifestos that he's published over the last 2-3 years, he believes parametricism is a new style, and it's a new organizational principle that not only his office operates with, but that you should too. In fact, everybody should. In fact, if you don't, you will be gobbled up and swallowed up by it, because it's a global style and it's coming, and it's too bad if you don't like it. It's the new. Let the style wars begin. And this is what they look like. And these are the people, if you adhere, these are the people you can hang out with. Patrick, Frank Gehry. Now he's happy. Gehry and Zaha. And these are the beautiful kind of things that, so the world will soon look like this. Well, they're actually designing a lot of things, so maybe the world will look like that soon. One of the more disturbing things at SciArc that week was to see the extent to which the students were actually learning very, very, very technique-driven things. This is a thesis that a student did, a beautiful thesis. It took him a year to do this. He kind of did a color application on some panels that they milled, and it was really gorgeous. And Patrick was taken with this, as you can see, and had some belief in it. But the disturbing thing is that when you ask the student during the thesis presentation, what can you do with this? The answer was, I have no idea. What do you mean, what could I do with this? I've worked a year on this. It's fantastic, don't you see? It's really beautiful. Well, I couldn't really quite see the beauty, although Patrick clearly sees the power and the importance of this thesis. You may see there are even some super old world parametricist people kind of in the background there. Some of you may know, who are also not so convinced. Anyway, the point of, and I'm finally really trying to believe it, but you can see who the student really wants to convince. He has no interest in me and a lost cause. This, I'm afraid, is what could happen. Well, why? Because if you look at the other extreme, the kind of moralistic extreme, they want to forget design altogether. Design is anathema. Design, especially if you're powerful and important and you make beautiful, huge things, then, well, we don't like you anymore. Now, these guys, they don't care about the world itself. They are interested in technique and in their own world, and it could be your world. That's the only extent to which they're interested, I think, in the world. Now, this is a bit of a caricature, but if you know these two positions, you'll know that they're actually not that much of a caricature. I want to contrast that with those two moralistic responses that I want to call ideologies, with something that I would call intelligent practices that are no longer dependent on ideological positions produced by other people, but in fact are driven by the production of architectural and design knowledge that they make actionable and that they use to transform their practices and the world. So I want to talk briefly about, just to show that. So those kinds of practices are detailed, or at least, let's say in these two issues published this month, Record and Architecture magazine, they are wondering about what these new practices would look like. They will have to be more attentive to the marketplace. They'll have to be much more savvy business-wise. This is an article by a pretty interesting business guru analyst for architects in the States, Paul Nakazawa. He's worked for Rem Koolhaas and for Tom Main and for Eric Moss, and has transformed a lot of people's practice. But in the article, Nakazawa, in this piece for Architect magazine, Nakazawa says that in 5 years in the US we'll need 50% less architects. This is the little bit that I wanted to read for you. I'll just transition into this and just say, you know, among the most profound effects that the downturn has had over the last year is that architecture and discussions have begun to focus less on style and the exquisite designed object, and more on the economic and societal value added by design and architecture. And that's because I think everyone agrees that we don't necessarily need more architecture or more design. We kind of need new design values. Perhaps the most promising development in this regard, and one that affects practices as well as education, is the growing recognition that design is not only a product. It's not just a table, it's not just a building, it's not just an urban plan or a landscape, but it is also a creative process and an engine for innovation. This could be the proverbial silver lining in the cloud, a chance to turn crisis into opportunity, something I think that the moralistic view does not do. But that will only occur if educators and practitioners are able to transform this recognition for this new value into action. Oddly enough, in education, the world that I come from, my business and practice, I guess you could say, the leaders of this recognition that design is about an innovation process have really not been schools of architecture. In fact, almost no school of architecture teaches, let's say, design as a process of innovation. Oddly enough, this has been taken up in the curriculum mostly in business schools. This is the dean for the Rotman School of Management in Toronto, and you know, in this school they have actually begun to hire designers, and they teach design thinking as part of the actual curriculum of the MBA program. So you can't get out doing an MBA of this program unless you engage in design in some kind of way. Also, the U.S. military and the U.S. Navy are much more aware of the importance of design thinking and design as an innovation, as an innovation process, than most schools of architecture. This is a remarkable piece that's from a journal that's published by the U.S. War College in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and if you read these articles, you read these magazines, these guys actually have read a lot more Manuel de Landa, Martin Heidegger, Gilles Deleuze, and other worthless contemporary philosophers than most of the architects who write the nonsense they do about these things. They actually make it practical. They use it. Probably the most, one of the most important places where this argument for design as a means of innovation producing has occurred at Stanford's so-called D School. It was set up by the founders of IDEO, the innovation practice in San Francisco. And the reason that so many schools, I think, are interested in this approach because it's a structured way to generate innovation. You can begin to understand the rewards of this kind of approach by reference to a distinction made by business thinker Peter Drucker between problem solving, which answers without questioning the problem and therefore adds nothing new, and innovation, which interrogates and reforms the problem and adds value by creating new knowledge and new products not anticipated in the problem. That, in fact, is the definition of innovation. It's the production of things that heretofore did not exist, that could be commercialized and sold in the marketplace. Problem solving shapes the known, while innovation coaxes into existence the unknown. Innovation can only be sourced by the unknown. Accordingly, design thinking is a thinking by doing, in which plausible solutions to a given problem are prototyped, interrogated, and redesigned, creating a continuous feedback loop until finally the right problem and then the right solution emerges. Prototypes, however, are not guesses extrapolated from the designer's perfect idea about what the final design might be, but are instead what-ifs that the designer uses to drive the innovation process itself. The designer uses the prototype to think through as many factors as necessary, material cost, fabrication, and adjust accordingly. Not only are the assumptions made in posing the problem transformed, but also with each prototype, new design knowledge or design intelligence is generated that can be repurposed to help solve the future design problems. Now you're probably saying, well, hell, we already know. We all know that already. Well, we don't know that already, because if you look at the way that most schools of architecture, at least in the US, have used digital design and fabrication tools and technologies, this is in fact not how they've been used. At SCI-Arc, when we first purchased some CNC machines, the way in which those machines were used were the same ways that we used old modeling techniques. I recall maybe 5 or 6 years ago there was an exhibition that was being put on by at the Pompidou, and Frederick Migaru was the curator. And Bill McDonald, Colton McDonald, it's a practice in New York, and they teach at Columbia and Pratt University, were teaching a studio at SCI-Arc that summer. And we really only had these machines for a while. And of course, they were 21st century digital practitioners, and they were running a 21st century digital studio. And I was shocked to drive into the parking lot in the middle of the summer to find all of my students out in the parking lot with the tables. It looked like a medieval workshop, and they were all polishing the 21st century prototypes that Bill McDonald had produced so that they could put red car paint on them, and they could look like Corvettes, and they could put them in a design exhibition. Well, the point is, that's really not the most powerful way to use these technologies. There are much more exciting ways, and we're beginning to use those. And but let's just say that's to use digital design and fabrication technologies which have the advantage of prototyping many iterations and creating a kind of knowledge that can be used to make a more robust response. That's to take that and to turn it really into an old-fashioned technique, basically, which is to make a model in the same way that we always have. Okay, now I'm going to do something really nasty, but maybe you won't be too upset. By showing black and white pictures here with a chart. For me, the only way to really understand the importance, I think, of how these tools and technologies could be used in a different way, and to understand what I really hope to convey with this idea of intelligence, I want to make a little, or show a little historical narrative. It's a speculation. I'll just say right up front that it might be true. It might not be true. I think it might be true. And the basic argument is that we live in a world where a completely different intellectual paradigm has begun to emerge. One where the relationship between thought and action is very different, and one in which the idea of truth is a very, very different idea than one that existed even just a few years ago. So I'll go through this very, very quickly because I don't want to bore you with it, but in a way, this is the most important thing I think I can show. The basic argument is, and we could begin modernity with the Greeks, or we could begin it, with Descartes. But I'm just, for shorthand, arguing that it's since the Enlightenment. So modernity, post-modernity, super-modernity. The basic argument is this: is that we've had change. There have occurred economic changes with different drivers from the 18th century to the present. And those have had results on the intellectual paradigm that we all work within. So in a way, I'm a kind of an economic determinist in a sense with this. So from the 18th century to the 1960s, let's just say modernization took the form of internationalization. The principal actors were nation states. Their ambition was to provide security for those who lived in those nation states. It was an industrial paradigm where goods were produced. From the 1960s to the 1990s, the driver of modernization became one of multinationalization, where the principal drivers were multinational corporations. They provided risk, or provided security against risk, not so much for everybody else, but for those who worked for them. And this was a post-industrial economy where services were provided. I want to argue, like a lot of people have, that from the 90s, let's say around the 90s to the present, we've been living under a completely different economic paradigm, one where modernization has taken the form of globalization, where the principal actor is no longer nation states or multinationals, but an odd hybrid called the market state, which is a state that operates like a company. And its interest, very unlike the nation state or the multinational, is not to provide security, but to provide opportunity. If you take them up on the opportunity, or if you take up the opportunity and you innovate, then you continue to survive. If you don't, you disappear. It's an informational economy where the principal product is knowledge, not services and not goods. Okay, there is a parallel to this. Oops, that's not it. And it's this. This is what was earlier blue, but now is purple. These bottom columns. And the argument I want to make is that as these economic periods have emerged and disappeared, so have the intellectual, let's say, dominant. Again, depending on how we want to begin the modern period, but just for shorthand, let's just say it's the Enlightenment. Philosophy was the principal the principal philosophy defined the paradigm. Its ambitions were to discover the truth, to discover an essence, and always in the let's say hermeneutical line, you always find true. You always discover even things that they're surface things, but you always discover true. From the 60s to the 90s, a different paradigm emerged, which really was a critique of philosophy's ambition to discover the truth. In the US, this manifested itself in a very odd kind of body of work, mostly post-68, French, German, and Italian thinkers, everybody from Heidegger and Nietzsche to Derrida, Deleuze, Virilio, even Vattimo and the so-called weak thinkers in Italy. The point is that, and you could say that maybe Heidegger and Nietzsche were the real beef of this. Their critique was to argue that all of philosophy's ambitions to discover the true were in fact impossible. What they were interested in was criticizing philosophy's ambitions to discover a truth, and to discover something even more true than that. To discover something that modernism had to bury in order to do what it did. You may remember Jean-François Lyotard's Postmodern Condition, a very famous book where he argued something quite bizarre, which is that postmodernism came before modernism. Modernism had to bury all of the craziness of what he calls postmodernism. Yeah. So there's something more true, and in this sense, this whole period of theory is interested in finding it even more fundamentally true than the one that modernism believed that it had discovered. What I want to argue is that something very different has begun to emerge in the 1990s. And that's a paradigm driven not so much by philosophy's ambition to discover a universal, absolute, fundamental truth, nor theory's ambitions to critique that and discover something more fundamental than that, but by intelligence. Intelligence, I want to argue, is a new intellectual paradigm. And it's a paradigm driven by, not by discovering the truth, nor discovering something even more true than modernist truth, but by transforming chatter into intelligence, by producing plausible truths, little truths, meaning transforming reams and reams and reams and reams and reams of data and information into actionable truths. And I want to try to get to what I mean by that in a second. You may remember that, well, I'll talk about it later. All right. Now, this has implications, I think, for architecture, and I want to go over those. And I promise, these are the last charts. I won't subject you to any more charts. These are just bonus. This is just, this is like, if the lecture is worth a certain amount of money, this is the bonus. We're in the bonus round right now. You know, the computer beat the humans in Jeopardy the other night, so I feel like we're there right now. Anyway, yeah, okay. So this parallels the periods I just described, but this is even more important. I think this has a real relevance for architecture. Modernism is principally interested in ideals, in fundamental truths, where thought guides action, where truths guide action. And that took the form of modernist manifestos. You had a lot of guys in pork pie hats and who dressed cool and drove cool cars and knew things before everybody else. That's what the avant-garde knows, right? They know things that we don't know. And they wrote all those things down in manifestos, and then they wanted to make the world on the basis of those things. Yeah? So those are utopian vanguards. I want to say so let's just say that's the beginning, that's the early part of the 20th century. If we look at the 60s to the 90s, in architecture in particular, and this may not be so true here, but I think it's certainly true in North America, it's true in many places in South America, and it's true in a lot of countries in Western Europe, certainly Belgium, Holland, the Low Countries, France, Germany. These modernist ideals broke down under critique, and the attempt was to replace those ideals with a whole range of postmodern ideologies. What's interesting, I think, is that what you still have, as with modernism, is that thinking guides doing, except that thinking here is a critique. It's a critique of modernism, and which results in an alternative. A new truth, very much like with Heidegger and Nietzsche, etc. So you critique the idealistic ambitions of modernism, and you discover something that modernism was covering over. And I've listed a couple of these ideologies. Postmodernism, we all remember, or maybe we don't all remember because we're all too young to remember, but 1980, the presence of the past was the theme of the Venice Biennale. Paolo Portoghese, there's a whole attempt, Stern, all those guys are arguing that modernism covered over something more fundamental, which was kind of a historicism. That's postmodernism. Deconstructivism, if you recall Mark Wigley's 1988 catalog, he argues there that deconstructivism is nothing new, that in fact it's simply uncovering a repressed vanguardism that was implicit in the Russian constructivists that got papered over. Folding, the episode in 1994, Greg Lynn and Jeff Kipnis. In America, we're quickly running out of French guys. Gilles Deleuze writes a book called Folding. It's about the Baroque. It has nothing to do with continuous surface, but how could you resist it? Especially when their chums with Peter Eisman's office had made a previous vanguard by reliance on Jacques Derrida. I mean, the great thing about these ideologies is that the French stuff is that you combine a kind of a French philosophical position that almost no one understands with a cool shape, and it's a winner. It sells. It's a winner. You can't beat that. Like cool left bank stuff with cool shapes, hard to beat. Folding tried that. Critical regionalism, the kind of pathetic attempts to argue against universal modernism by Kenneth Frampton. Of course, my favorite, because I made this one up, this is my favorite ideology, crypto-delusion materialism, and that's any book or any agenda with a Sanford Quinter introduction. If Sanford wrote the introduction, that is crypto-delusion materialism. And then the newest two, of course, sustainism, which I can only call stainism. I mean, I don't know sustainism. You can laugh when I say things like that. And parametricism, Patrick Schumacher's new style. Now, the utopian vanguards of modernism get replaced by these theory vanguardists or Pomo rearguard people. What I want to say is that from the 90s to the present, something really different has emerged because of the economic paradigm I alluded to, but it's different in a number of ways. I want to say ideals and ideology have been transformed, or not transformed, have been replaced by intelligence, and I'm going to get to what I mean by that in a second. Maybe the most important thing to say is that in both these previous paradigms, thought guides action. So there's an attempt to discover something fundamentally true. So the relationship is between thought guides doing, but not with intelligence. In fact, thinking becomes a form of doing. Thinking is literally a producer of things. It's not a seeker of pre-existing truths that could justify a practice or a movement. It's the production of something. It's iterative, and it takes the form of scenarios, and let's say in big, large-scale planning, or with prototyping. What's also different is that design intelligence is produced, and it's unique to each practice. So there's no pre-existing truth out there. It's produced by the practice itself, and these vanguards are replaced by those that I want to call design intelligenters. Now, I'm going to try to be a little more fun now that I've done my school marm stuff. Let me try to make a little more sense out of these terms: ideals, ideology, intelligence. Are we okay?
I was getting some water.
No, it's just water. Okay, I thought there was a technological problem. There will be one in a second, because I have. Well, there is one. Now I'm stuck. It's a serious problem. How is that possible? How can your zipper get hung in a microphone? Okay, that's a joke for later, maybe. Okay. Oh, thank you. That wasn't a bit of a technological problem. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to try to make some more sense of this. Ideals are pretty straightforward in architecture. You know, they're the big guys, all guys. They wrote the big books, the great manifestos, the truths that we all should adhere to. Maybe we should still adhere to them. I think probably so. But then they're replaced by these guys. Really strong ideologists, so strong and so powerful that even in a black and white photograph, Bernard Tschumi has a red scarf. That's powerful. That's a powerful ideology. Peter Eisenman and Leon Creer's famous battles, you know, in the 80s, my ideology is better than yours. Mini-me up in the corner. Wigley and Eisenman, very powerful thinkers, very powerful ideologists. And their publications were always things like this: oppositions. I like that. Oppositions. I oppose you. My ideology is better than yours. And then, you know, we know these, the famous Pomo guys. Portuguese's Postmodern is a catalog for the Venice Biennale in 1980. The Decon catalog, Mark Wigley, Philip Johnson. Philip Johnson seems to be involved in way too much of this. Folding in Architecture, Greg Lynn, Jeffrey Kipnis. I just thought I would throw in one title with a Sanford Quinter. I love this book and I love these people, but he did write the introduction of that. Sustainism, this is as close as you should get to this book. I bought it online, and I advise you not to. You can see everything you need to know in that image of Sustainism. It's all right there. It's a new cultural manifesto for the Sustainist era. It sounds like a combination of Stein and Stalin somehow. Anyway, it's not good. Sustainism is the new modernism, and Patrick Schumacher actually argues that his is the new modernism as well. And that's parametricism, a new global style for architecture and urban design. Let me try to explain what I mean by intelligence. So how are ideals, which we know about, absolute truths, universal thought, ideologies, which are these attempts to replace those ideals with many versions of the truth. Yeah. What is intelligence? I have a very different idea about intelligence. This is kind of an interesting book written by a guy named Jeff Hawkins. Jeff Hawkins, he invented the software. He wrote the software for the Palm Pilot, and he made a ton of money on this thing. And he decided that he, in order to really make even more intelligent devices, that he needed to understand the human brain. Because even though that computer beat the two Jeopardy champions 2 nights ago, that computer still does not have the computational skill of the human brain. So Hawkins went back, he did a PhD in neurobiology at Berkeley, and he wrote this book. It's not a scientific book, it's not even a dissertation, it's kind of a popular book. But he develops in this book a pretty interesting idea of what he calls intelligence. Intelligence is measured by the capacity to remember and predict patterns in the world, including language, mathematics, physical properties of objects, and social situations. Your brain receives patterns from the outside world, stores them as memories, and makes predictions by combining what it has seen before with what is happening now. Prediction is not just one of those things your brain does. It is the primary function of the neocortex and the foundation of intelligence. The cortex is an organ of prediction. If we want to understand what intelligence is, what creativity is, how your brain works, and how to build intelligent machines, we must understand the nature of the predictions. The human cortex is particularly large and therefore has a massive memory capacity. It is constantly predicting what you will see, hear, and feel, mostly in ways you are unconscious of. These predictions are our thoughts, and when combined with sensory input, they are our perceptions. I call this view of the brain the memory prediction framework of intelligence. I think it's an amazing idea. What it really implies is intelligence is not the storage of huge amounts of information as with AI. Intelligence, in fact, is constantly changing as the human interacts with the world around it. So, for example, he says that the brain is a storage device on which and in which patterns are written, and that we project those patterns. And then when we project those patterns and the world that we discover in that projection, in that speculation, I would say it's a prototyping. In that projection, the world if the world we discover does not accord with those patterns, we rewrite that new information in the form of new patterns. In a way, it's like wiki. It means that there is no fixed, absolute, universal truth. It means that we're constantly projecting and producing new knowledge, new information, new patterns, and, as he calls it, intelligence. So intelligence is this memory prediction framework that he discovered. I think it's a pretty interesting idea. And I'm going to try to lighten it up a little bit here and go into my act a little bit. I don't have a sound thing set up here, so I'm gonna try and play something and put this down so you can hear it. If you can't, I'll tell you what it's about. This is it's an interesting book review written by by one of the founders of the D School in Stanford, Larry Leaford. He's kind of a hero to all those people. And it's a little review on a book that in the States 5 or 6 years ago was a huge bestseller. It came out, there was a spate of this kind of activity at the time. There was a lot of criticism of fundamental truths. You may remember we had a different president at that time. In the news media, we couldn't really figure out what was going on. We had no idea. So the only source of real information was the Comedy Central show with Jon Stewart. But also, you may remember a very famous character emerged during that period, a guy named Stephen Colbert of the Colbert Report, as he calls it. Stephen Colbert is a comedian that acted like a right-wing politician, but you couldn't tell the difference between them. In that year, Stephen Colbert introduced a word to the English language that later became the word of the year according to Webster's English Dictionary: truthiness. Truthiness. Truthiness means that it's something that gives the appearance, though it may have nothing to do with the truth. It kind of looks and smells like the truth. It may or may not be, but kind of truthiness. Now, during the same period, there was this little book written by this guy, Harry Frankfurt, who's a moral philosopher at Princeton University, who's very disturbed by all this truthiness. He was disturbed principally because the world was so full of information and so much stuff was out there that he couldn't tell the truth from what was false anymore, he thought. He was very disturbed by that. So he decided, as a moral philosopher would, I guess, it's a natural inclination, to write a book to deal with this problem. And he called his book On Bullshit. Now, it's an interesting idea. It's a much more fascinating idea. Has anybody read this book here? Not a single person? There's one person back there. They probably work in a bookstore in New York. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. And you know what was incredible about the book is that Frankfurt was upset with bullshit, but what he discovered was in fact something quite revealing and interesting about bullshit. Now I'm going to see if I can time this right, because I want you to hear Harry Frankfurt tell you what this is. This is unbelievable. I've got to deal with this. Okay, I'm done with that. Okay, let's see if we can get to Harry. Oh, here's the cover of the book. And this is Harry Frankfurt in his study with a very earnest colleague asking him some questions.
What is your theory of bullshit? What is bullshit?
Well, it consists in a lack of concern for the difference between truth and falsity. The motivation of the bullshitter is not to say things that are true or even to say things that are false, but he's serving some other purpose. And the question of whether what he says is true or false is really irrelevant to his pursuit of that ambition. The bullshitter is not necessarily a liar. What he says may very well be true, and he may not think that it's false. I was careful to try to make a distinction between, make clear the differences, as I understand it, between bullshitters and liars.
Interesting. Well, let me try to explain a little bit about this and why it's important and why because I think it's really I think it's incredible. I think it's really important. What he says is that the bullshitter it's not that the bullshitter has any real interest in the truth. He's not necessarily a liar. In fact, what Frankfurt is trying to do is to draw a firm distinction between the liar and the bullshitter. What he says is this. He says the truth teller and the liar are the same because they both know the truth. The difference between them is the truth teller tells the truth and the liar covers over the truth. The bullshitter, on the other hand, has no real interest in the truth whatsoever. They just tell you things because they have an agenda, because they're trying to convince you of something. Now, Frankfurt was upset by this for obvious reasons. But one of the things that he does observe is the incredible creativity of the bullshitter. Because well, it's true. You know this very well. It's easy to, if you know the truth, it's easy to tell it. It's just as easy to lie about it. But to bullshit means you have to constantly be producing. It's an incredibly arduous task because you know once you spin a little, then you have, it's like here with the snow, then you need really deep boots because it just keeps getting deeper and deeper and you have to work a lot. So the bullshitter, however unattractive the bullshitter is in many ways, what is really attractive about the bullshitter is that it produces constantly. Now, the other thing about the bullshitter, and you will know this because you have probably engaged in this activity yourself, both bullshitting and also the bull session. You know, there's a very famous thing called the bull session, and that's the exciting part, and that's what Larry Liefert was writing about. In the bull session, 5 people sit in a room, and they take their professional hats off, and they speculate. Well, it could be like this, it could be like that, maybe this, maybe that. We call it brainstorming. Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's total bullshitting. I mean, it's true. But okay, but think about it. What's exciting about it is that it's constant production. And it's typically a group activity. Now, this was too good a slide. I couldn't resist that one. What I want to say is this: is that we can go back and insert some of this language back into this previous diagram, because if you think about it, the modernist and the idealist, they know the truth, or they can cover up the truth. Yeah. So that's about lying and truth telling, but that's about knowing the absolute truth. Now, if you know it, you know it. And if you don't, and if you know it and you want to hide it, you can do that too. You can lie. But here, these guys, they're incredibly productive. They're very powerful. They run all of our schools. And they're busy. They're constantly producing stuff. Just look how many there are just in 30 years, and there are many, many more than that. Why are they bullshitters and not liars or truth tellers? Well, they're bullshitters because, as Harry Frankfurt says, they have no real interest in the truth. Yeah, because what this whole agenda was set up to do was to destroy the truth. What they want to do is to replace it with an agenda, with a kind of line. They want to fill you or feed you a line. And so the bullshitter actually has no real interest one way or the other, but they want you to go along with them. And I think that's true with all these people. Now, the intelligencer, I want to say, is something else. And this is, I think you can learn something from the bullshitter, which is this idea of constant production and speculation. That form of speculation is a way to produce things that might be true, but that aren't necessarily true or false or part of an ideology. What do I mean by that? I mean, what's exciting about BSing is that it's producing a form of knowledge, potentially, that has, that's neither true nor false, but might be true. That's a conditional form of, it might be true. And that, I think, is what's at the basis of intelligence. The problem with the bullshitter is they're producing things that might be true to get you to follow a line. The intelligencer is producing things that might be true in order to engage, I think, in a new form of practice. What I want to say is that, and I have to be careful with the time, my God. Okay. What I want to say is that this idea of intelligence has implications on a number of areas that are important, not only for practice, I think, but for schools. One of these areas is design research, and this is the part I told you I was going to read. I'm going to read just. I hope you don't mind. It will be very beautiful. I promise. It'll be a better text than the last one. I'm just going to read just a little bit. And it's because again, this is you may know this. It's about Peter Rice, an incredibly important thinker, one of the most important engineers of the 20th century. It's about a little book Rice wrote called An Engineer Imagines. Maybe I'll remember it and I won't read it. In the book, Rice draws a distinction between the architect's design process and the engineer's process. And what he says is that the architect is always looking for good solutions to problems. The engineer, on the other hand, is never really interested in the solution to the problem. What the engineer is looking for always is the right problem. The engineer, in fact, will take a problem, because problems only have one solution. They have one solution. So architects may speculate about many solutions, but engineers search and search and search and search for the right problem until the right problem is discovered, and then once the right problem is discovered, then you produce a solution for that. What's exciting about that for Rice is that problems, even if the solutions to them don't seem immediately apparent or useful, can be cataloged, and each time you approach a new problem, you actually take all of those problems that you've developed a body of knowledge from over time, and those can be used to solve new issues, new design problems. And in the book he talks a lot about the way in which most of the innovative solutions that he came up with while he was at Ovid Arup really came from work he had done in other areas. So they work in this particular area, they speculate, they ask, they make a lot of, they try to discover the right problem, maybe they get somewhere, maybe they don't. But the production of this speculative knowledge that results from that, in fact, spills over and can be used going forward. Would you say also that so I think one implication of this is that we're not really looking for the right solution. We're looking for the right problem. Another implication is that design models imply a new kind of understanding of prototype. And this goes back to my comments earlier about SciArc and the way that those machines were used earlier on. This is a terrific book written by Michael Schrage 5 or 6 years ago. He has a new book that's coming out now that'll be an update of this. But Schrage makes an argument that that prototypes used to be, or at one time were understood as the innovations at the end of the process itself. So the innovation process results in a prototype, and that is the solution. What he says is that, in fact, what's more interesting is to think now of prototypes as the mechanisms to produce the innovation itself. They are not the innovation, they are the generators of the innovation. So if you think about the way that we use 3D printing or CNC milling or any of that, it's not that you use those to make a final model, it's in fact that those become literally ways of thinking through a problem. And what do those result in? Not just a final thing, but in fact an enormous amount of knowledge that's generated in the speculation. In this book, he refers to an article written by Stephen Levy from much earlier, and the article is an argument for a new form of speculative knowledge that Levy calls spreadsheet way of knowledge. In 1971, the first digital spreadsheet was invented, and one of the things it allowed you to do was to speculate on what ifs given certain parameters of a business business operations. So if I have a company and you have a company and you want to buy my company, before the digital spreadsheet we had to sit down with 25 accountants and go over those things. But if our business was oil, then as soon as we get through with those, it all changes. Because if the conditions or the parameters we use to evaluate the companies are stable, then that can happen. But if they're unstable, then then digital spreadsheets become incredibly important, because what they enable you to do is create knowledge that's neither true nor false, but that might be true. This is what our company would be worth if oil was worth $18 a barrel. If it were $8 a barrel, this is what it would be worth. That kind of speculation, that spreadsheet production of knowledge, is knowledge that's neither true nor false, but it might be true. It's a form of actionable, potentially actionable knowledge. Okay, I'm going to run through this quickly because you're getting tired and I'm getting bored with myself, and we should go on. Just to show you, just to give one example and say that this is not all about digital design and fabrication. This is an article written for an OMA publication 5 or 6 years ago. It's an interesting little article about a competition that OMA and Herzog and de Meuron were working on for Astor Place in New York. And this piece is about the very different ways that OMA uses models than the way Herzog and de Meuron use the models. And I'll just let you read it, but basically the argument is that at OMA the blue foam core models are used to produce enormous amounts of speculation that have to be materialized. They are thoughts that have to be materialized in a model. You make lots and lots of them. That model results in new information. That information returns to the design process itself. So the models become a way, like the prototype, of thinking through and producing new information, new knowledge. That's not true with Herzog, who, as this writer who was on the team says, Jacques needs instant perfection. He has a vision and he doesn't take shit. This is becoming a theme tonight, I apologize. Even in the very first stage of the design, concepts come with built-in details and reality checks. Models are finished things. Models must have a tangible surface. Jacques touches and examines the models as if shopping for shirts. What do you think, does this one look good on me? So in the OMA idea, or the OMA way of working with models, the models are producers. They would be bullshitters, except they're not trying to convince you of an agenda. They're simply trying to materialize thought that might become important in the process. Another example, well, so that's a means of producing knowledge. This is you probably all know this essay. It's the opening essay for Ben Van Berkel and Caroline Boss, UN Studios, a book called Design Models. And I think they're onto something with this. They say, look, we look back at our work over the last 15, 18 years, and we discover if we look at everything we've done and we look at it carefully and analytically, what we discover is tons and tons of drawings, sketches, models, competition entries, briefs, telephone calls. If you were to consider that a form of chaos, a form of chatter, a form of lots and lots and lots of information, some of which is useful and some is not. They do a kind of pattern recognition analysis of that information, and they say that we've discovered we have 5 or 6 or 7, I don't know how many they have, 8 design models. They say we no longer design projects, we design models. And what these models are, in a sense, is the DNA of their office. The DNA of their office is not a style, it's not an ideology, it's not an agenda. It's literally the produced knowledge that was recombed by you in studio that resulted in the form of 6 or 7 or 8 congealed packages of design intelligence, I would say, which they call models. Those models they use going forward into competition, for competition entries, or to deal with certain typologies. So now, a lot of this is, some of this is bullshit for sure, I think, because it's both a PR thing for you in studio, and I think maybe the way they work. But it's an interesting way to think about design knowledge. I would even say about parametricism, if Schumacher said this book is not the new world view of all architecture, it's just this is what we do. This is our set of design models. I would be happy to go with that, and I would call it intelligence. But if this is an agenda to try to convince everybody that we will all be working that way, that we will have to conform to that kind of style agenda, that everything will operate in that way, then I think it's bullshit and it's total ideology. Yeah. The last thing is that, design product has changed. Probably before 1990, monographs didn't look like this. They weren't this fat. They didn't have this much stuff in them. Something changed pretty dramatically in the 90s, and what happened is people started to produce books that were huge compilations, I would say, of knowledge, of design knowledge, design intelligence. They weren't simply catalogs of projects in the way that monographs had been before. This is, I think, a really good example of this. FOA's Phylogenesis, simply a cataloging. Sadly, it has a Sanford Quinter essay in it. It's a cataloging. I mean, I love Sanford Quinter, but still, it could be called an ideological agenda. But this is simply a cataloging of a whole range of parameters and a whole range of effects that they used to win the competition, to design and build the Yokohama port competition. Okay, I've gone over my time, and I've indulged myself, and I thank you for indulging me. But I need to take just a minute and show you quickly, if I have a minute left. No one's moving yet, so I'll take that as a good sign. Show you very, very quickly some things we're doing at my college in an attempt really to do 3 things. To adhere to this new idea of design research, to find the right problem, and to use prototypes in a very different kind of way, and to generate some knowledge, some design knowledge that I hope is useful for my state that I live in. About the first year I was at University of Kentucky College of Design, we were one of the 10 finalists, or no, 20, sorry, I'm already bullshitting, it's not true. There were 20. It would have been better if there were 10, but there were 20. We were one of the 20 finalists for the Solar Decathlon competition. You may know the U.S. Department of Energy every 2 years or so runs a competition, and you design, build, and drag an off-the-grid, 1,200 square foot house up to D.C., displayed on the mall, and they judge it. This is an essay I wrote in a little book about that. University of Kentucky, you may know, is a decent university, but you will see that we placed 9th overall. But the most important thing is that we placed 2nd because we have an incredibly well-known basketball coach, and he has a Twitter site with about 5 million people on it. So he asked everyone to make us the People's Choice Award, and we almost won. We came in 2nd. We did a very nice competition. We made a nice box. It did 9th overall. What was nice about it, though, is that it created a kind of both a body of research knowledge for the college, but also a number of the students who worked on this moved to the next project which we worked on. So we created a body of knowledge, but they also moved to the next project where we found the right problem to the answer, which is Solar Decathlon House. So the Catalan house is an answer to the wrong question. The wrong question was, can you make a nice house for a certain amount and can you win the competition? The right question was a different one, and it's a question that we found in this project that we're working on right now, which is about a 10-year research project. It's called HB, or Houseboat to Energy Efficient Residences. I didn't make that up, someone else did. It's a project, and I'm going to go quickly here and say, it's a project where we took a lot of the DNA that came from the design of that Soto de Catalan house, and we were confronted with the question, why do so many people in the state of Kentucky, a state where there's so many poor people, why do they live in absolutely energy efficient mobile homes? And the answer is it's cheap, they can't buy them, and the mobile home industry does a very good job of selling them. So we have now begun to work with an investment company to design units to compete with the mobile home market of about 1,000 to 1,500 square foot units. They cost $1 a day per less to heat and cool, between $60,000 and $100,000 to purchase with the land. And we're doing that as a way, and this is the company we're working with, this investment company. They invest in a lot of counties in the very poor part of the state of Kentucky. It's in Appalachia. These are meetings with those guys. Now, I show you this because all of these units will be built in former houseboat factories. Why? Because in and around Lake Cumberland, where these factories were, there were about 18 of these, and they've all been closed but 2. So we're building these to create a new product for the marketplace. Hopefully they will compete with evil mobile homes. But they also, all of the workers in this industry were laid off. And so we're trying to build units that in fact will put this highly skilled labor force back to work. That's why we're making them in the mobile home factories. I mean in the houseboat factories, sorry. Yeah. We made a bunch of these things. It's hard to sell something like that to people who really want a mobile home. So we ended up with something like that. They're prototyping the first 2 of these this summer. We've gotten about close to $5 million worth of federal funding to do research and to prototype these things. The other thing is that about 96% of the materials, the value chain of products that go to make this are made in the state of Kentucky. So, what is that about? It's about being engaged in a research project, finding the right problem by asking finding the right question, then finding some solutions to it. Hopefully living up to, now just say these are also flat packable, and you can put them in TEUs. We're doing multifamily this year. We hope that we have not compromised too much on design to make them marketable. These are some of the multifamily we're doing this year. We're in the process of buying a piece of land right now to develop the property with some of these single units and with some of these multifamily. So really what we're doing is producing things, but we're also producing new architects with a very different approach, I think, to the marketplace, and with a very different approach to design. Design at our college, we believe, is a very high-end enterprise. Students come in, they learn all the fancy schmancy softwares, but we load them up early on. We give them lots of dessert. Studios where they make toys and shoes and all kind of frivolous, ridiculous things so that they can learn the techniques. And then by the end, they're sick of it, and they have to do the studio. So they want to make, they would like a sandwich or some potatoes, and we give them this. Okay, I don't know where this ends up, but I thank you all for coming out. I appreciate, again, being able to be here. Fabulous city, except for the snow. And I don't know how you do this, if we do questions or not, but thank you very much.